Hi everyone. Today let's learn about the next type of sentences, that is the complex sentences. Now, what is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is a sentence that contains one independent and at least one dependent clause. This means that in complex sentences there are mainly two clauses present there. First one is the independent clause, the clause which has a complete meaning in itself, the clause which can stand alone as a complete sentence, that is called the independent clause. And the dependent clause is that clause which depends for its complete meaning on the independent clause. And when these independent and the dependent clause comes together, this forms the complex sentence. For example, while I'm a passionate basketball fan, I prefer football. In this sentence, while I'm a passionate basketball fan, this is the dependent clause. It is not giving us the complete meaning, whereas the I prefer football, this is the independent clause, and both are forming the example of complex sentence. So now let's learn about the basic difference between the independent as well as the dependent clause. One similarity is there that both the clauses have a subject and a verb. This thing is common in independent and the dependent clause, that both clauses carry subject and a verb. But what is the basic dissimilarity? Independent clause makes a sense on its own as a sentence. It can play the role of a complete sentence, but whereas the dependent clause is concerned, it does not make sense on its own as a sentence. It cannot stand alone as a sentence because it doesn't carry the complete meaning. So this is the basic difference between the independent as well as the dependent clause. Let's read the examples. Like, Jane ate pasta because she was hungry. In this sentence, Jane ate pasta. This is the independent clause. It can stand alone as a sentence, but because she was hungry, this is the dependent clause, and alone it cannot stand as a sentence. Sam went to the park after he finished school. Sam went to the park, this is the independent clause, and after he finished school, this is the dependent clause, and both combined together comes together as a complex sentence. Let's read some more examples. Like, first one that is written, when the cake is browned, remove it from the oven. It's a complete complex sentence. See, when the cake is brown, it is not giving us the complete information. So this is the dependent clause, and remove it from the oven, this is the independent clause, because it is having a complete meaning, that when the cake is brown, remove it from the oven, remove it from the oven. This clause is having the complete meaning, so this is playing the role of the independent clause. So once again, a complex sentence has an independent clause and at least one dependent clause, and when both comes together, one independent and one dependent clause, then they join together to form the complex sentence. Independent clause and dependent clause both carry the subject and the verb, but they have the difference in having the meaning. Let's read some more examples. Like, when he handed in his homework, he forgot to hand the teacher the last stage. So as you can see that in this sentence, first clause is the dependent clause, and the second one, he forgot to hand the teacher the last stage, this is the independent clause. Next sentence, the human brain never stops working until you stand up to speak in public. So, at the first place, the human brain never stops working. This part, this clause is having a complete meaning. So, this is the independent clause. Until you stand up to speak in public, this is the dependent clause because it is depending on the other part of the sentence to get the complete meaning. Number three, even though she suffered from arthritis, she studied hard because she wanted to go to medical school in London. So, as you can see, at the first clause is the dependent clause, and the next clause is independent because that is carrying a complete meaning that she studied hard because she wanted to go to medical school in London. Number 4, because Alex and Michael arrived at the bus station before noon, I didn't see them at the station. In this sentence, at first place there is the dependent clause, and at the second place there is the independent clause that I didn't see them at the station. So both are forming the complex sentence. Number 5, before the bell rang, the children packed up and the teacher collected their work. So, in the fifth sentence, at the first place there is the independent clause, and at the second place there is the dependent clause. So, as you can see from all these examples, that always a complex sentences carries one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. Independent clause which have the complete meaning in itself that can stand alone as a sentence, and dependent clause that depends for its meaning on the independent clause. So I hope you like this. Thank you. Thanks for watching.